Clinic. The Key Clinic uses novel and innovative non-prescription based medicines to address developmental delays in children, as well as support their families. One of the key beliefs of the clinic is to treat the root cause of why children may not be fulfilling their full potential. And Ms. Warley will be expanding on how she does this. So a little bit about Sarah. Sarah has a BA and MA in experimental psychology from Oxford, and she's also an auditory integration therapist. We will have a Q&A session afterwards, and I encourage you all to turn on your cameras and ask your questions. So yeah, over to you, Sarah.
Thank you for that. And good morning, everybody. It's so lovely to meet you. And I only wish it was in person. So I'm very sorry. If anyone is brave enough to turn on their camera and they're not still in their gin jams, please feel free to do so, because it would be really nice to meet you. And I want to thank you, first of all, for giving up your precious Saturday morning to listen to us. And I know time is the most valuable resource any of us have. So I really do appreciate you doing that. So my name's Sarah Warley, founder of the Key Clinic, and the Key Clinic specializes in neuroplastic and drug-free therapies aimed at making life easier for children. So we treat a range of children with a range of difficulties, I should say. So from, dyslexia, dyspraxia, dyscalculia, attention deficit, hyperactivity. We can have children that are struggling with mental health problems such as depression or anxiety, night terrors, that sort of thing. But we also have children who potentially don't have any kind of label, but they're just underperforming relative to how smart they are. So they're not quite firing on all cylinders. And schoolwork for them is harder than it should be. So we treat the children. Now, invariably, the truth is we end up treating the parents as well, which probably comes as no surprise. So we do treat adults and children as well. We have clinics in central London, in Marylebone, in Berkshire, in Sussex, but most importantly, we treat remotely. So we are actually treating families from around the world. So that's the Key Clinic. But how on earth did I end up sort of doing all of this? I've got 4 children myself, and it was going through, becoming a mother. One of my closest friends gave birth to a little boy at the same time that I did. And it became really apparent very early on that he had all sorts of quite extreme behavioral problems. So he could be extremely hyperactive. He was sleeping maybe 3 hours a night at best, and that was disjointed sleep. My friend was absolutely on her knees. Lots of obsessional behavior, not interested in playing with toys, not interested in playing with other children, couldn't go down for a nap without screaming for the next hour afterwards. So she was, and her husband, both pretty desperate. And they went to see a pediatrician, and they were told, well, yes, clearly we're looking here at autistic spectrum, stroke ADHD. There's a big overlap between the two things. And I'm afraid there's not a lot we can do. You might want to think about some stimulant medications, but your son probably is not going to end up being able to go to a regular school, etc. You just have to get used to that. And she was devastated, as you can imagine. And both of us just refused to accept that nothing could be done to turn things around. So it was really, I guess having the background that I had, I thought, well, let me dig around, let me have a look at the research, let me have a look at any evidence that exists. And I've lived in lots of different countries around the world, so there was a lot of interesting studies that could be looked at. And we found out, actually, there's a lot you can do. There are a lot of really good evidence-based therapies that you can do that can significantly improve the functioning of a child. And I mean, her own son, now, if you were to meet him, you genuinely would never know that he'd had those very severe problems. He's flourishing academically. He's at a really great school. He's really good at sport. He's got tons of mates and a great sense of humor. So, you sort of look at that. And actually, the interventions we did were relatively simple for him. And you think, how many other children are there out there who have been written off, actually, have been told, well, there's not a lot you can do, or you'll just have to put up with it. So I think once you discover that you can do something about it, there's almost a moral onus to make sure you can help as many children as you possibly can. So that's essentially why the Key Clinic came into being. It was wanting to bring all these different disciplines under one roof to make it easy for people to access. So if let me see if I can share screen. We'll go to some slides that I put together. Let me move that. So let me see. Is that all right? Are you all able to see that okay? Yeah? Okay, so this, by the way, we're not an all-female team. I just want to point that out. This just happened to be a training session that most of us were at last summer. And we said, oh, let's all stand outside and take a snap. But this is the Key Clinic. And we're a multidisciplinary integrated team, and truly integrated. So we're not running in separate silos. People don't get paid or not paid depending on whether or not they do their thing. We work with the child at the centre of care around them. So we have medical doctors, Walsh Institute physicians, functional medicine practitioners, nutritionists, naturopaths, auditory specialists, neurodevelopmental practitioners. That's something I also qualified in a postgrad, and health coaches. So it's truly multidisciplinary. Now, this may sound like such a crazily obvious thing to say, but the brain does not function in isolation. It doesn't exist in isolation. Now, I've always found it very strange that psychiatry departments sit in one end of the corridor, gastroenterology sits somewhere else, you know, and yet we now know most of the chemicals in our brain are manufactured in our gut. But there is a tendency, I find, to almost compartmentalize our health. And if a problem is manifesting as seemingly something to do with the brain, we all assume that's where the problem originates. But it may well not be. Because the reality is, as far as the brain's concerned, you know, it's inextricably linked to the body. It's part of the body. So any dysfunction in the body is going to have an impact on the brain. And we're going to talk about these things in a bit more detail, but biochemical imbalances in the body will have a direct impact on brain functioning. Internal and external toxins. Now, it sounds weird to talk about internal toxins, but there can be, you know, if you've got a very dysregulated microbiome in the gut, very often there can be quite a lot of neurotoxins that are kicked off as a result of that. And then, of course, external toxins. Food and drug effects. There are certain foods, and again, we'll talk about this, that can have a very big impact on brain functioning if they're not properly broken down and digested. Pain and inflammation, you know, that it's now becoming increasingly recognized that the immune system does actually cross the Berlin Wall and cross the blood-brain barrier and affect the brain, and that there can be inflammation in the brain, and that some forms of depression might be linked to that. Distortion of sensory input, and retained primitive reflexes. So we're going to talk about all these areas, but it's simply to say the brain does not exist pickled in a glass jar. So our approach at the clinic is always trying to look beyond the labels. From a clinical perspective, sometimes I find the labels unhelpful because really they're just descriptive terms of a cluster of symptoms. It's not as though we've taken a sort of objective biomarker and said your child most definitely has this. And those descriptive terms move, as we know, with the DSM every 4 years. So I tend to want to look at the symptom and then from there trying to swim upstream to try and find the underlying causes. So I can have two children presenting with very similar anxiety, but the underlying causes can be completely different. So essentially our approach is to work from the ground up to give the body what it needs in order for the brain to be able to flourish. So it's quite a biological approach that we take to things. So one thing we know is there's been a very sharp increase in childhood difficulties. So dyslexia, dyspraxia, as I mentioned, attention deficit, autistic spectrum. I mean, we look at the numbers for that. In the 1980s, I think it was 1 in 10,000 children being diagnosed. We're now up to 1 in 60 is the latest that I heard. Now, we know that epigenetics are environmentally driven. They're not genetically driven to increase at that rate. And then, of course, we've got depression, we've got anxiety disorders, and certainly there are a lot of changes to the way in which we're living our lives. So the question becomes why? Why this huge increase? Is it simply better diagnosis? Well, yes, we are much better at picking things up and diagnosing them, especially things like dyslexia. But if that were the case alone, for example, with autism, you'd have these hidden hordes. Where are the people that weren't being diagnosed before? Are they in mental institutions? Where are they? And the numbers don't stack up for that to be the case. It appears to be a very real increase. Neonatal developments. One thing that we know is that there is a direct correlation between children being born earlier and earlier. I mean, if you think about things today, we're able to put together a sperm and an egg with IVF that wouldn't evolutionarily have got together. We're able, thankfully, to preserve life from a younger and younger date if the child's born prematurely. There are many more interventions that are used during birth. Post-birth, there are lots of parenting gadgets that mean that that child has less stimulation potentially than they used to. So if we think about children before, they were carried around in sort of slings, they were put on the floor and allowed to crawl around. Now we clip them into a car seat. We take them out of that, it clips directly onto a stroller. We can take that out and sit it on the table if we want. So they're not quite getting the stimulation they used to. And all of those things, fantastic though they are, have an impact on neurodevelopment. Another theory is this toxic tipping point, particularly when we look at the rise in autistic spectrum. There's a theory that in a way that the children that are developing autism are the canaries in the mine. I mean, it seems to be more boys than girls, and there's a theory that estrogen's a natural buffer against the toxins that we now have, because it's true that we now sleep on flame retardant mattresses. We spray our homes in antibacterial sprays. We're living in sort of hermetically sealed airtight containers. We microwave things in plastics. We're eating food that's pumped full of antibiotics. There's a lot more toxic input than there certainly used to be. And then you've got, I guess, cultural changes that have happened. I mean, are we under any more stress than we ever used to be as a society? I mean, if you dial the clock back and look at the First World War and the Second World War, the answer is certainly no, but the nature of the stress has changed. So we've now got ongoing drip, drip, drip feed. Evolutionarily, we don't know how to separate that which is an immediate threat to our systems from that which isn't. We're just bombarded with news from around the world. Should I be feeling existential angst about this and worrying about this or not? It's difficult to separate. And you've also at the same time got the breakdown of, society, religion, extended families, communities. People are very much more isolated than they used to be. So that's a long-winded answer, but there's a lot of stuff. There's a lot of change that's happened that I think has potentially led to these increased numbers. So what are the standard treatment options? Well, there's suppress the symptoms. And if we look at antidepressant medications, if we look at stimulant medications, that's largely the approach. And prescriptions of Ritalin-type meds have quadrupled over the past decade. So more and more people are taking them. I mean, children in America are taking them as a study aid, which I personally find quite terrifying, because yes, it works. It certainly works. It dials up the dopamine, dials down the norepinephrine, but at what cost? And we then look at longer term studies showing increased risks of depression, suicide, stunted growth, changes in brain development, etc. So it's not without its cost. Find ways to compensate. So that's largely the approach adopted within schools. So if you've got a child that is really struggling, for example, with handwriting, don't worry, let's give them a keyboard. If they're very distractible, let's sit them at the front of the class, or let's give them something to fidget with. Or let's prop them up with lots of extra tuition. Let's just keep going over it and over it and over it, and eventually, hopefully, it'll go in. Instead of asking perhaps why that child's having that difficulty in the first place. Or, as I said, in the case with my friend, it was simply learn to live with it, just put up with it. And actually, that was the response to 70% of parents whose children were diagnosed with autism. That was the NHS response to them, which again, I just think there is more that we can do. So the fantastic news is that things can and do change. We're living in this extraordinary era for neuroscience where we're beginning to understand all about neuroplasticity. I mean, basically everything I learned at university is all completely null and void and irrelevant now. And probably everything you're learning now will be null and void, in the next 10 to 20 years, because things are developing at such a rate. So we know the brain is in constant flux, rewiring itself every minute of every day. And we also know that with the right stimulation, the brain can overcome obstacles. And then you've also got this, growing understanding around epigenetics, which I also find super exciting. It means that our genetic blueprint doesn't have to be our inevitable fate. We're getting better and better at knowing what you can do to stimulate something, to either turn on or off the expression of that particular gene. And that's something we're going to come on to talk about in a bit more detail. So the main areas that we tend to focus on as a clinic are the three areas that for us we have found have the biggest game-changing outcome. So the first that I'm going to talk about is to do with correcting any biochemical imbalances which exist in the body. And then I'm going to go on to talk about maturing the nervous system. And then the last bit, I want to talk about how we hear and how that can have an impact on behavior. So what we can do is I'll go through each section, then I can stop, and then we can ask some questions perhaps after each section but as we go through, rather than you thinking, oh, I've got to remember that till the end and then come back and ask it, okay? So the first of these, so why do I talk to parents about the gut, and why is the gut called the second brain? As I mentioned before, a huge proportion of our neurotransmitters are actually manufactured there. So if you are not able to absorb and have enough of the building blocks to manufacture those neurotransmitters, your brain's going to be dysregulated. So, and if you have a problem of malabsorption, digestive problems, by the way, every single child I've ever met who's on the autistic spectrum just happens to have a very dysregulated gut. Again, conventional medicine would refer to that as, just a sort of strange comorbidity, a sort of coincidental factor. I would argue it's a direct causal factor behind some of the symptoms. In fact, I'll give a bigger example on that. So we know, for example, that there's often a difficulty digesting the protein molecule in gluten, milk, and soy for people on the spectrum. Now, not for everyone, but for some. And what happens is these little molecules go partially digested into the bloodstream as gliomorphine, casomorphine. And as the name would suggest, they're chemically very similar to a morphine drip. So we now know they're small enough to cross the blood-brain barrier and to radically alter behavior. So typically, people who have this little pattern going on crave those substances. So these are the children chowing down on as much milk and cheese as they can get and loving all the pasta and the pizza, and because each time they're having it, they're having a kind of hit from it. And that hit can create a lot of autistic symptom behaviors. Now, there's a very simple urine test you can do for it now, which will tell you if there are these elevated peptides in the urine, if they're not being digested properly. But when they're not digested, they create this, as I said, complete change in behavior and functioning. So we often do the test now for parents, but you can just say to parents, so if someone's on the spectrum, take those substances out of the diet, take them out 100%. And if we're barking up the right tree, things should get a lot worse before they get better, because you've just taken a drug from a drug addict. And literally, sort of a week to 10 days afterwards, behavior can get a lot worse. And that means you are barking up the right tree. And then suddenly you can have a very dramatic breakthrough in functioning. That was actually something with my friend's child that had a massive impact on how he functioned. I'd say 80 to 90% of his autistic symptoms vanished as a result of that. Now, the science behind it, I looked at the Autism Research Foundation in the States, and they asked a sample of 25,000 parents of autistic children. They said, well, out of everything you've tried, what's helped? What hasn't helped? What made things worse? 65% of parents said the single best intervention they did was taking gluten, dairy, and soy out of the diet. So I look at that, 65%. I mean, that's way more successful than a lot of drug trials. Nobody gets rich doing it, and that's probably why the information isn't out there and you haven't got the huge double-blind placebo tests. But nonetheless, it's worth trying. It's worth having a shot to see if it can improve things. Complex role of the microbiome, that could be another whole presentation in itself. But again, that's a very nascent part of neuroscience, and we're beginning to understand the impact that can have on functioning. And then, of course, you've got direct neuronal links between the gut and areas of the brain that control, this is in broadest terms, but self-awareness, emotion, fear, morality, memory, motivation. There are literally direct neuronal links. So to treat the brain without considering the gut, to me, doesn't make any sense. So of course we do that work, and we have nutritionists and we have naturopaths, but I want to talk a bit about some work that we do that goes far beyond that. Biochemical individuality. So what we know is that abnormal levels of particular key nutrients can have a direct impact on your brain chemistry and your mental health. And some people are born not very well able to absorb enough of a certain vitamin, mineral, or amino acid from their diet. And conversely, there are other people who are just born, again, due to a genetic roll of the dice, not that well able to excrete enough of a certain nutrient from their system. So they may have the most perfect diet in the world, but it's never going to be enough for them to be able to create the sort of balance in neurotransmitters that's required for healthy brain functioning. So at the same time, you know, we look at these multivitamins that are there, they can actually cause more harm than good for people. There's no such thing as a good multivitamin, because we are all completely and utterly individual when it comes to our biochemistry. So a lot of the work that we do, we're really trying to pioneer this work in Europe and put it on the map. It's some work coming out of the States, somewhere called the Walsh Institute. And I don't know how many of you have come across this work, but it really is extraordinary. So William Walsh is a biochemist. He's 88 years old now. He's worked over the last 30, 40 years. He worked with the late, great Dr. Carl Pfeiffer, who did a lot of this work specifically with schizophrenics. In fact, he was up for the Nobel Prize for the work that he managed to do with them. So it's extraordinary work. What he basically did was analyze the biochemistry of people with mental health problems. Now, that sounds such a basic thing to say, but it doesn't happen. And it certainly doesn't happen very often. We reappropriate drugs from the past and see whether or not they'll work without necessarily testing a person's biochemistry. So he tested 30,000 mental health patients and controls. He's got more than 3 million lab chemistries for patients diagnosed with all these things: ADHD, autism, depression, bipolar, schizophrenia, and also more than 2 million medical history factors for these patients. So that's a really extraordinary database of knowledge. And what he found was that there are some very striking blood and urine chemistry differences between those who have mental health problems and those that don't. And what was really interesting about this work is that, you know, we've got over 300 really important, I mean, more than that actually, important nutrients in human biochemistry. But the imbalances that were seen time and time again with mental health problems seem to boil down to 6 main nutrient areas, imbalances that seem to be fueling these mental health problems. And not coincidentally, these nutrients are absolutely essential for neurotransmitter synthesis and or regulation. I mean, he spent, for example, the first 10 years of his life working with, analysing the biochemistry of violent young offenders in prison and saying, what's different? What's different in their biochemistry? And there were some very clear patterns that emerged, which we'll talk about, some high incidence of pyrrole disorder, etc. He's even analysed the biochemistry of serial killers. He's a fascinating chap. Perhaps we should get him on here next time to talk in more detail. He's really extraordinary. So these seem to be the high incidence imbalances in mental disorders. There's something called undermethylation, and it basically means that you don't produce enough serotonin if you're undermethylated. Now, there are characteristics that go with undermethylation, and they tend to be, in fact, I guarantee a huge proportion of this audience that's listening right now that you're undermethylated, because they tend to be very high achievers. They tend to be slim, they tend to be academic. On the surface, they all appear beautiful and calm, and under the surface, their feet are going like crazy, like, you know, ducks in a pond. Perfectionist, that, you know, there are a lot of traits that go with it, but that's undermethylation. Overmethylation. These are people that actually overproduce serotonin, norepinephrine, GABA, they overproduce neurotransmitters. Zinc deficiency, copper overload, we'll talk about these, pyrrole disorder, and toxic metal overload. So these seem to be time and time again, when you analyze differences between a neurotypical population and those that are experiencing mental health problems, these are the imbalances that we see time and time again. So here are some examples. 90% of people diagnosed with ADHD just happen to have an imbalance in their ratio between copper and zinc in their systems, okay? We now understand the impact that that has on neurotransmitter levels. So if you have this zinc-copper imbalance, you underproduce dopamine and you overproduce norepinephrine. So those very things that we mentioned earlier, stimulant meds target to rebalance, you can rebalance them using targeted doses of supplements to correct this imbalance. And 90% of children and adults, anyone diagnosed with ADHD, just happen coincidentally to have this imbalance. By the way, the majority of those young offenders had this imbalance in prison. We know that 30% of people diagnosed with ADHD have something called pyrrole disorder. Again, this is a little genetic mutation that you're born with, and it means that you are unable to hang on to the B6 and the zinc in your body. So you can have the world's most perfect diet, but you basically urinate out the zinc and the B6 through these pyrroles. And people with pyrrole disorder, they tend to be the ones that have the violent rages, the aggression, the extreme mood swings, often Jekyll and Hyde type behavior, children that absolutely lose it and do something and then they're so remorseful and they really regret it and they didn't mean to do it. There's a high proportion with oppositional defiance. Because what happens when you don't have those things in your system, you tend to get very high levels of oxidative stress and toxic metal builds up. And again, dysregulated, the GABA decreases, the serotonin decreases as a result. So it totally disrupts neurotransmitter levels. And again, it is treatable, but we'll talk about that. Depression, now this is really interesting. What Dr. Walsh found was that depression isn't one disorder. I mean, I mentioned earlier, brain inflammation is probably a sixth one to add to this list, but he discovered that there are 5 very distinct types of depression, very distinctive biochemical imbalances which seem to underpin it. So undermethylation accounts for approximately 38% of those within the depressive population. Now, these are the people that SSRIs work brilliantly for. Because it's going to dial up that serotonin level, they're going to feel better. Of course, what they don't tell you is that over time, you have to keep cranking up the SSRI levels if you want to feel normal, and that over time, those neurons are being squeezed dry at the synapse and you become less and less able to produce as much as you need. But anyway, undermethylated, 38%. Folate deficient, another way of saying overmethylated, is about 20%. Now, they've got exactly the opposite problem to the undermethylated depressives. If you give this group of people an SSRI medication, you're going to make things 10 times worse. This happened to a really good friend of mine who was living in California. She was very depressed following a very awful divorce. She went to see a psychiatrist. Again, they don't test, they guess. So they put her on an SSRI because that's the first one we reach for. She felt infinitely worse. She went back to see them again. And they said, oh gosh, we obviously just haven't got the dose right. They doubled the dose till she was suicidally depressed. We got her tested by a Walsh Institute psychiatrist, trained psychiatrist, and he found she was in the overmethylated group. She should never have been given those medications. And Dr. Walsh has referred to 18 out of the last 20 school shootings in America. The children beforehand were, again, given SSRIs, but without being tested. So, he's saying, I'm not anti-meds, but for God's sake, test, don't just guess. So overmethylated, undermethylated, copper overload. Now, this is a really interesting one. So postnatal depression, when we're pregnant, our level of copper goes up 200%, and most people are able to excrete that within the first kind of 2 to 3 weeks after they give birth. Now, if again, you happen to be born with a genetic mutation that means you're not so good at excreting copper, your body's going to hold on to that. And hypercupremia, so this excess of copper, can lead to extreme anxiety. They call it postnatal depression. I think it's more accurately a postnatal anxiety, and at its extreme form, a psychosis. Perfectly possible to treat this by doing things that will take down that copper level. So if you give this person an SSRI, they're not going to get better, they're not going to get worse, but it's not really going to have a big impact because their problem is copper. And again, the Walsh Institute has a 98% success rate in treating postnatal depression using nutrients. Pyrrole disorder, 15% of the depressed population, and then toxic overload is 5%. So pretty staggering, and it does leave me wondering, why don't we analyse this more rather than simply reappropriating what's currently out there? So nutrient therapy, and I would recommend definitely having a read of this book if you're more interested in the sort of advanced biochemistry. It's now possible to rebalance neurotransmitter levels without using medication. So what we do is we'll carry out urine tests, we'll carry out blood tests, we'll find out exactly where the imbalance is. And then what we do is target the imbalance with these very high doses of vitamins, minerals, amino acids to stimulate the body, to give it what it needs to be able to change. And it can be really successful. It can be quite game-changing for many people with depression, anxiety, ADHD, oppositional defiance, OCD. We've seen this approach work with very high degrees of success. So, a question people often ask is, well, how on earth can vitamins, minerals, amino acids, how can they significantly help a person with a serious mental health illness? Don't I really need a powerful drug to get the job done? Well, we understand that nutrients work on many levels. Number one, obviously, the neurotransmitter synthesis, epigenetic regulation of gene expression. So we now know that certain supplements can have this epigenetic expression effect, turning on and off the expression of genes. Protection against oxidative stress. Again, it's present in 95% of people diagnosed with learning behavior, mood or psychosis disorder. That's a pretty high percentage. And we know also that oxidative stress increases every time you're ill, you're injured, if there's an emotional trauma, external toxins, pollutants. So the outcome studies indicate a 70 to 90% efficacy. I'd say with children we've got coming to the clinic on their stimulant meds with ADHD, we get about 85% off their meds by treating them this way. Normalization of 1 to 3 biochemical balances is generally sufficient, and there's a particular order in which we treat. And for the majority of them, medication support is usually unnecessary. Now, at the Pfeiffer Institute in the States, they were able to take schizophrenia medications down to 20% of what they needed before. They weren't able to come off completely. But for most people, being able to go from the 100% dose to 20% was a game changer, because it meant they didn't have the awful side effects, the weight gain, the increased risk of suicide, all those other things that can go with it. So, you can do the two things in tandem, and it may be that over time you can decrease any kind of drug prescription. So let me see, how do I stop share? So any questions so far on that bit? That's all I had on the biochemistry bit. No? Let me see, we've got a question here. Aside from being able to explain, and is this for me, this question? No, it's not, that's for somebody else. If anyone's got a question, do feel free to ask, or you may think of something and want to ask at the end, that's fine as well. Nothing? No? Stunned silence. Does anyone need a cup of coffee? have I droned on a bit too much? I hope not. Okay, so we'll go back. I
think we have one question.
Oh, we have a question? And let me see, I'm just going to stop share. Okay, so let me see. Center recording, how to establish the right, how do we establish, which one shall I answer? What is the equity level of the key clinic? How well spread is this clinic for more deprived population? The majority of children that we help are state school children. We do help those in the private sector as well. But the reality is, we're not funded in any way by the NHS. And that is, much to my regret. You know, what I would like to happen is to have a separate charity set up to make this, or a bursary fund to make this accessible to a much wider group of people. The reality is we've put through many children at no charge as much as we can, you know, particularly those who've come from pretty traumatic backgrounds. So we have done that, but yeah, but I would that it was available to everyone and that it was available in the NHS, but sadly it isn't at the moment. What else do we have? Oh, thank you. I've been super clear. Thank you for that. Will you be able to send your presentation? I'm deaf and hard of hearing. Absolutely, yes. I've already sent a copy of it actually. So yeah, we can definitely share that at the end. Great. Okay, so let's see now if I can go back to finding. This is where it all goes horribly wrong and I find I've lost my presentation. Oh, here we are. There we are. Okay, good. Right, so the next bit I want to talk about is maturing the nervous system. Now, why is that not moving? That's very odd. Oh, there we are, maturing the nervous system. So this is, I don't know if any of you have ever heard about primitive reflexes, whether anyone's ever talked to you about that and you think, what on earth is that all about? Okay, I'm going to give you a little top line on what that's all about. So when we're born, our brains are only about 20% developed, as I'm sure you know, and that first year of life is a period of extraordinarily rapid brain growth. Now, part of the way in which the brain grows and develops is through this little sequence of what are called primitive reflexes. They're these little baby movements that babies make at different stages in their lives. And it's a set sequence for all of us. So what happens is one reflex comes up, gets stimulated, and when it's had enough stimulation, bam, it integrates. Then the next one comes up, gets stimulated, then it goes. And this is how it works throughout the first year of a child's life. And a doctor will typically test these reflexes shortly after birth. And then by the time a child reaches their first birthday, they should have all properly integrated. So when you test for them, they should no longer be there. Now, each one of the reflexes has a very specific purpose that it's there to achieve. But when it doesn't go, and very often it doesn't go, it gets stuck. And the vast majority of children that we're seeing and treating have these stuck primitive reflexes. So they're like little immaturities in the nervous system. They act like gremlins in the works. They basically mess everything up. They interfere with your balance, your coordination, your eye tracking, your emotional responses to things, how sensitive you are to things. They interfere with everything. So we all make the assumption that by the time a child is kind of 4 or 5 years old, well, that was when their birthday was, they must be old enough to go to school, right? But neurodevelopmentally, they can be years apart. You can have a child that was born prematurely, whose nervous system is 2-3 years behind where the other child's system is. There can be lots of things that can interfere with these reflexes progressing in the way that they should do. Genetics is definitely a factor. What happened in utero? Was there extreme stress? We know, for example, that a child is born more likely to have a retained something called a Morrow Reflex, which I'm going to show you. If there was a lot of trauma and anxiety for that mother, were there drugs when the baby was in utero? What was the birth like? Was it quite traumatic? Was the baby yanked out by forceps? Because if they were, often it means that their neck movement can be quite restricted. And the way the reflexes work, often it's to do with the head and neck movement. There's got to be complete mobility. You get yanked out by forceps and you don't see an osteopath. You can't make a full rotation of your head. You're never going to get rid of a particular reflex. It's always going to be stuck. So that can be one thing. If the baby didn't crawl, if there are certain motor stages they missed, they didn't get quite the stimulation they needed. C-section birth is increased probability. Emergency C-section, even greater probability. There's an increased probability with IVF. So we know all these factors make it more likely that your reflexes will get stuck. Okay, so that's very weird. It doesn't seem to want to change. Oh, there we are. Oh, I just wanted to put that picture up there because I like it so much. But the point of the reflexes is that it's meant to be making life easier for you, helping things to happen on a sort of autopilot. A lot of it is to do with maturing of the cerebellovestibular system. Okay, So sometimes things get stuck. So I talked about that, and many learning and childhood difficulties can come about from that. So here's a very obvious example that I'm sure you're probably familiar with. Do you know the palmar reflex? If you put a finger in a baby's hand or a pencil, they'll do this gripping. And they can do it very early on. And actually, you can pick up a baby like this. They'll carry their entire body weight by gripping on like a little monkey. You know, they sort of hang on and you can pick them up. Now, that's marvelous. But what if it hasn't gone when that child starts school? Well, they're the ones with rubbish handwriting that the teacher says, come on, let's practice again. Gosh, aren't you holding the pencil in a weird way? You're a bit cack-handed. You're not very good at fine motor skills. Well, yeah, because there's this little reflex that's messing it up for me. And the thing, by the way, I want to say with all these reflexes, they're all sort of brainstem controlled. So they're beyond conscious control. So no amount of practice is going to get rid of them. We'll come on and talk about the way in which you do get rid of them. But here's an example of one, a TLR reflex, tonic labyrinthine reflex. Now, it's an early infant response to gravity. So if you hold a little baby on their back, if you imagine me holding a little baby, if you tip the baby's head forward, they curl up in a little fetal ball. And if you extend the head down, they go into complete hyperextension of their body, okay? It's an early response to gravity. Now, if you have a TLR, you haven't properly matured your gravity system. So I've learned I can put my head anywhere I like in space and I don't fall over as a result of it. 101 of balance, moving your head independently from your body. If you've got a TLR reflex, you have no independence of head and body movement. So there's this mismatch of information coming into the CVS. You know, feedback from your ligaments and tendons telling you you're one place in space, feedback from your inner ear telling you you're somewhere else, feedback from your eyes telling you you're somewhere else. So these people tend to get car sick. They get motion sick. I'm wondering how many people are listening to me now and think, oh my God, I might have that. They get motion sick. Poor spatial awareness, can be a bit clumsy, bumping into things. It affects the eye's ability to converge. So the eyes literally can't converge properly, and often you can be seeing double or blurry as a result of it. Because the eye tracking is directly linked into your balance mechanism. If your balance isn't fabulous, your eye tracking won't ever be fabulous. Another little one, here's the Morrow reflex.
Here's the Morrow reflex by having him relax, unsuspecting, and then give him a sudden stimulus. And there's a good Morrow, quiet and head midline, and then just give the stimulus of dropping him back a few inches, and that's a good normal response. Okay.
Now, yeah, that's not nearly as horrible as some of the ones that I've watched about, because this little early infant startle reflex, any stimulus, it's the only multiple stimuli elicited reflex. So any sudden change to gravitational, he's testing here, but it can be light, it can be a loud sound, it can be a change of temperature, it can be someone touching the baby and they didn't expect it, and you get this, okay, and with that holding of the breath, there's a ton of adrenaline and cortisol that floods the system. So it's evolutionarily a really important survival one. It's the reason they take their first breath. It's the reason if they're not breathing, the first thing a doctor will do is stimulate that reflex, okay? Now, if it gets, oh no, not again. There we are. If it gets stuck, it can wreak havoc. And I can't tell you how many adults we treated at the clinic with a fully retained Morrow reflex. It makes you hypersensitive to everything. So you're in a chronic state of anxiety. You're kind of waiting for the hammer to fall. You're hypersensitive. One way you can test it is shining a light into the pupil, and it literally doesn't constrict as quickly. It's literally like being a deer in the headlights. So hypersensitive, these are the people who only like certain clothes, cut all the labels out, dislike of change. Everything's got to be just so. I need a routine. Sound, they're very sensitive to. Can't accept criticism. Longer term, it's linked to things like hyperglycemia, because you're burning through all this adrenaline all the time, and then you need more sugar, panic attacks, shallow breathing. So there's a whole load of things that go with it. Now, if you've got a retained Morrow reflex, no amount of psychotherapy is going to help you, because you can talk about it, but it's brainstem. It's hardwired in until you give the body the stimulation it needs to let go. And a lot of those symptoms are very similar to Asperger's if you look at them. Another really important one, the asymmetric tonic neck reflex, the ATNR.
Asymmetrical tonic neck reflex. The asymmetrical tonic neck reflex is tested by carefully turning the infant's head to one side, which typically results in a tonic extension of the extremities on the facial side and a bending in the contralateral extremities. This reflex is also known as the fencing reflex because of its resemblance to the typical position of a fencer. The asymmetric tonic neck reflex is present at birth. Its purpose is to train muscle tone, hand-eye coordination, and balance. The reflex physiologically disappears after about 6 months of age.
Okay, so that's another little, oh, well, anyway, we don't need the rest of that. That's another little reflex. Teaching a baby, again, brain mapping of the body. I've got this half of my body and this half of my body, and I can move them independently of each other, okay? But what they're also doing is training their eyes to track in the horizontal plane, because each time they make that extension, they're tracking it with their eyes again and again and again and again. Now, when it gets stuck, and this is really significant, this particular reflex just happens to be stuck in 90% of dyslexics. When it gets stuck, it creates an invisible dividing line through the body. If you can imagine from the top of the head all the way down through the body, in fact, maybe I'll stop sharing for a second just to try and show you what I mean. Okay, so imagine this dividing line, okay? I haven't got a pen here, but if I'm then going to test a child's eye tracking, I'll have something here, I'll be moving it side to side like this. Someone with an ATNR will turn their entire head from side to side because their eyes can't comfortably cross that midline. And then if you say, okay, can you keep your head really still? And let's just have a look at what happens. Their eyes might manage a couple of passes, and then you'll see, you probably can't see with my glasses, you'll see like this, like a jump at the midpoint. So when someone with dyslexia says, gosh, the words keep jumping on the page, I keep skipping a line, you know, it's their eyes jumping their head because they can't make this cross through the midline. Same with writing. Hand can't comfortably cross the midline. So very often someone with an ATNR will turn the page completely to the side, and they might end up resting their head down here while they're doing it. And there's also this pattern of dyslaterality that we see in dyslexics because the two hemispheres of the brain don't get the chance to properly integrate at about 6, 7, you know, when the milk teeth come out. They don't get to do that specialization. So it has a very profound impact on functioning. And again, you know, to me, why on earth we wouldn't simply treat that with anyone that's diagnosed as dyslexic and see what improvement we can get? I don't understand. So those are the, one thing I want to say with this, huge compensatory effort. Okay, so when these reflexes are stuck, you're having to jump through a load more mental hoops than you would otherwise to achieve the same as the next person. It takes a huge amount of effort. So often children with this just more tired, you know, they're working a lot harder than the next person to achieve the same thing. So maturing the nervous system through exercises. So we do neurodevelopmental exercises, literally turn back the clock, say, okay, it didn't work first time around for whatever reason, let's go back and re-stimulate. Let's give the body a second chance to develop. So we treat in developmental order. We'll go back to, we test the child so we know very accurately, and everyone has a completely different pattern of what's there and what isn't there. But we start at the earliest retained reflex. We provide it with enough stimulation that eventually it throws in the towel and then it's gone. And then we move to the next one and the next one and the next one until the system is fully matured. And it can have a huge impact on someone's functioning. It's not a silver bullet, you know, it doesn't happen overnight. As with all neuroplasticity, you have to work on it. You have to do a good 15 minutes, 15, 20 minutes of exercise every day over a 3 to 6 month period to get enough stimulation for these reflexes to finally accomplish what it was they were there to do in the first place. This is, a parent sent me this in and I just thought it was rather lovely. It was her little girl who'd been diagnosed with dyslexia. Actually, I've got to tell you, she had a TLR. When we were doing these drawings, visual perceptual drawings, where we asked her to copy one shape from one page onto another, she drew double of everything. No one had thought to ever actually ask her. This girl had been seeing double her whole life, but to her that was normality, right? And it was because of the TLR. She also had a walloping great ATNR reflex. It was fully retained. So all we did was some exercises to get rid of the reflexes, and her mother sent me this saying, oh, you know, I took this from her vocab book at school. This was her, you know, before she did the exercises, and this is her a few months later afterwards. Now, she never practiced writing. She couldn't even do joined up writing before, but all we did was take away the blocks that were getting in the way, the physical blocks getting in the way of her being able to actually learn what she was being taught at school and write easily. So, you know, as I said, when I look at the alternative model, which is just keep giving them extra tuition and extra learning support and propping up and just telling them to try harder, work harder, sometimes it's literally something physical that prevents them from being able to do it. So we crunch all our data. We have a big digital database that we put all of our clients through. So we're hoping to connect the dots across all these neuroplastic areas longer term. Actually, while I say that, I'm going to put this out there to everyone. If anyone is interested in doing a lovely double-blind placebo-controlled test on any of our therapies, I would be delighted to be involved in that. Because, as I said, we don't have the funding of a drug company to be able to do these things. There are lots of studies. The exercises are based on 40 years of research from the INPP, but do feel free to contact if you think any of this would be interesting as part of a PhD study, etc. So our results, 95% show overall improvement. This is the neurodevelopment we're looking at. 86 achieve full neurodevelopmental maturity. By that, I mean bringing all of those scores down to 0. We score from a 4 to 0. 4 is fully retained. 0 means it's fully integrated. 89 showing improvements in ocular motor functioning. Very often children go and do, you know, lots and lots of eye exercises. But again, if the cause is lower down in the brain, the eyes always regress unless you treat the underlying causal factor, which can be retained reflexes. And then the eyes just suddenly can function on their own. They're suddenly able to track. And yes, 83 saying they strongly recommend us. So it works. Should we do any questions on that, or do you want to go to the auditory? Should we stop share for a little bit?
I think we can give some participants a few seconds to write out the questions if they have any.
Yeah, sure. So what have we got? Yes, if anyone wants to put their hand up or any, oh, there's a question. Sharon. Hi there. Oh, I can't hear you. I think you might be on mute. Are you?
I am indeed. Good morning. So I'm Sharon. I'm also a doctor by background, and I've done a PhD and a researcher. And I happen to have a little girl, Isla, who was diagnosed with ADHD and dyspraxia at age 7. So we are patients of your clinic, and she's doing very well. So I just wanted to validate everything you said.
Lovely. How lovely. How far through things is she? I'm assuming she will be doing the biomedical work then on the imbalances causing the hyperactivity and reflex work for the dyspraxia.
Correct. But so sort of being brutally honest, we sort of budgeted, we couldn't afford the whole program. Yeah. So she did the auditory program. And then I did some reading on the Walsh Institute myself. So my questions are 2 to you, if that's okay. And she's doing a million miles better, although there is room to improve. And she is now, so I'll start my questions. So she is now about 8 weeks into the neurodevelopmental program.
Yes.
And she is not an oppositional child at all. And she's never been. She's lovely, you know, cooperative. She was never sort of the hyperactive, disruptive. She was just the very typical of girls, just very sort of inattentive type ADD. But the exercises are becoming a bit of a battle now, because every day, you know, she's tired, she's after school, and she finds them a bit boring and actually probably a bit tiring. She's got fully sort of retained Morrow. So she's got, you know, it's sort of mountain to climb. What sort of advice do you give parents to sort of, you know, win the children on? And you know, I've tried multiple briberies, depending how much we spend on the program as we spend on the treats to keep her going. Yeah. I just wondered if you have something that you sort of recommend. That's my first question. And my second question would be, I've sort of treated Isla with high dose zinc, B complex, magnesium, the omega, you know, and I've researched and found like the purest and the best based on the Walsh advice and the probiotics. And I go as far as saying, you know, we went on holiday in the October half term, and I thought, oh, you know, we've got Sunsea and good food. Why do we need the nutrients for a week? And I could see her completely crashing. We came back and started the supplements, and life was good again.
Yeah.
Am I doing any harm by giving her these supplements without having sort of followed the proper assessment? So those are my two questions, if you don't mind.
Yeah, really good questions, really good questions. Gosh, and that's interesting because when you said at the beginning that she was more the inattentive type, you know, of course, they've stopped this diagnosis of ADD now. They've kind of lumped them all together into ADHD, which means, guess what, more Ritalin, you know. But anyway, but we found there tend to be different underlying causes for those two things, that the ADD tends to be much more to do with the reflex and the hearing, and true hyperactivity is more biochemical. But you've got your evidence there with what you've tried and the fact that she crashed. I would say on that front, I mean, again, I can recommend you separate to this, it would be great to get some labs done just to see exactly what her levels are at, if you can. And we did, you know, we've sort of haggled down the biolab where we get a lot of our tests done in London, so that they've grouped together the main Walsh panels so that they do them for a lot less for people. And I'd be happy also if you send me exactly the doses, her weight, etc., to bounce that off our medical director and just make sure that you're giving the right doses, that we're not missing anything. You have to be a bit careful depending on the copper level. If you've got high levels of free copper, you do have to be a bit careful with how you dose, because if you give too much zinc all at once, you can get a sort of copper dump that happens. And sometimes for certain individuals, we normally measure ceruloplasmin as well. You sometimes have to kind of assess that as well, because it then binds with the copper to bring it down. But I understand, you know, obviously if we're not able to afford all of that, and I'm very happy as a fellow neuroscientist to offer you some free advice on that, and we'll just tell us what you're doing, get some tests done. We'll bounce it off one of our doctors and we'll get that sorted. In terms of keeping them on course with the exercises, you're right, it's difficult. That's why I say to parents, it doesn't work, you know, without quite a bit of effort, and sometimes bribery can indeed be the best way. I find with children, and I'm sure you've probably done this, but sitting them down and getting them behind it, really explaining to them, because they don't understand. They're thinking, why on earth am I having to do these rather strange little movements every day? How's that going to help me? But explaining to them, you find this really tough, don't you? And you're finding that tough. And wouldn't it be really nice if that went away? And, you know, we often say to them, you know, basically doing this hard work now will mean for the rest of your life, you're not going to have to work as hard as you have been in the past. Everything will be easier going forward as a result of doing this. I mean, we have done in the past intensive, well, we still do actually, intensive neurodevelopmental exercise sessions in the clinic where we have one of our practitioners doing it. And sometimes a couple of those sessions is enough for them to pull up their socks and think, okay, I'm going to get with the program again, and hearing it from someone else. One thing I will add to that is that working through, I know we're getting a bit short of time, I'm going to have to hurry up, but getting through the Morrow Reflex can be tough for people because you're stimulating it. So I warn parents, it's going to get worse before it gets better. They're going to get more clingy, more tearful, probably less willing to go into school. And that's great. If that happens, it's working, you're stimulating it. And then when it goes, bam, it's like a cliff edge. It's such a fundamental change in the way that child behaves. But happy to pick up this discussion perhaps later and see what we can do to help support further. Okay.
Thank you, Sarah.
That's okay. You're welcome. Shall I crack on with the auditory? Because that's the last little section I've got to go through.
Yeah, I think it might be better to have questions at the end. Yeah.
Okay. So let's go to auditory, although this is a much quicker bit. So smoothing out hearing anomalies, what on earth is that all about? Okay, so we have lots of children that come to the clinic and we say to the parents, have you ever thought of looking at the way in which they're hearing things? And they say, well, I've had a hearing test and it said it was all fine. And what they mean is they've had a hearing test and no significant hearing loss has been identified, which of course is really important. However, nobody's really looked at the way in which that child is hearing sounds. So there can be all sorts of problems that can interfere with both learning and behaviour. So first of all, the way that we test, we don't do a narrow range. We cover 8 different frequencies from 125 up to 8,000 kilohertz. And the reason for that is that covers the whole range of human language. We test one ear at a time, and we test the quietest possible thing a child can hear at every one of those points. So that gives us a lot more information. Of course, it'll tell us if there's hearing loss, but for example, sometimes I look at those hearing curves and they look like the Alpine slopes. They're like this. And that tells me they're not hearing all bits of language at the same volume. In fact, there can be 30, 40 decibel swings in volume. So maybe they hear the vowel sounds beautifully, but they don't hear the sibilants, or they don't hear the lower sounding consonants. So that's a bit like listening on a mobile phone in an area of poor reception. That child's going to have auditory processing difficulties. Maybe they've got poor lateralization. Now, this is a test we do at the end. We put a bone conductor in the middle of the forehead. We go all the way up the sounds, all the way down again. And we simply say, can you point to where you're hearing that? Now, in an ideal world, you want someone to hear something pretty much in the middle of their head or vaguely to the right. But very often we find them jumping from left ear to right ear, back again, moving left and forward. Now, that has a direct impact on the way you process auditory information, because sound going in your right ear, as we know, is processed immediately here, Wernicke's area and then Broca's area in the left temporal lobe. But sounds entering your left ear have to go here, then they've got to make that big journey across the corpus callosum to get there. And that journey can create a time lag. So you can have a scenario where I say cat and you might hear act if the A was tuned into the right ear and the lower pitched C was the left ear. So it's kind of flipping the order of phonemes within words. So what happens in that scenario is the higher brain, as always, has to get involved and try and make sense of this and unscramble the mess that's coming in, and then answer the question that the teacher asked them. So very often that dyslaterality we see with dyslexia. We see it very often with young children with delayed speech or speech and language problems. It can be linked to difficulty with spelling or reading, because if you think about those things, they're just associating a set pattern of sounds with some symbols on a page. And if you're not hearing those sounds the right way round, it's going to be very hard for you to learn to read or to spell or to speak or to do any of those other things. So that can be a problem. Hypersensitive hearing, the amount of children, again, we've had at the clinic, very particularly often those who are told that they're highly distractible, or those on the autistic spectrum, very often have through the roof hypersensitive hearing. So we test them and we see everything's at minus 10 decibels because that's the quietest thing we can test. And, you know, that can make you feel very easily overwhelmed. It can mean you can't fade out the sound of someone whispering in the back of the class, because that's like someone shouting in your ear. You're listening to the overhead light bulb. So it can have a big impact on functioning. And then the last thing is this very interesting area of depressive hearing curves. Now, this work came from the two French doctors, actually, Dr. Alfred Tomatis in the last century and Dr. Guy Berard, who was an ENT doctor. And they basically developed a way of not only assessing these things, but then being able to treat them using a specially modulated type of music. So it's called auditory integration training. I'm going to come on and talk about that. But first of all, this depressive hearing curve, what Dr. Berard noticed, he was used to treating people for their, speech problems, dyslexia. And then he noticed there's a very distinctive hearing curve, and it's in the left ear, and it's a spike at 2, down again, and a spike at 8, called the 2-8 curve. And whenever he saw it, it was linked to that individual being extremely depressed, suicidally depressed. And he saw this and he thought, what on earth is this? Is it cause? Is it effect? Is it that when you're depressed, you develop this rather strange hearing curve? Or is it this hearing curve creates a depression? He said, well, I'm not a psychologist. I didn't claim to know. But his conclusion, after having treated thousands of clients with this problem, was that it appears to be a causal factor, that when you alleviate that hearing curve and you correct it, the depression would often lift. And he ended up being referred extraordinarily suicidally depressed patients by psychiatrists across France, and his treatment was purely to treat them through auditory means. Now, there is not nearly enough science around this, and I would love if anyone's interested in doing a particular study on this. I think it would be fascinating. What I can tell you from my clinical experience has been the curve never lies. Whenever we've seen it, it's been extraordinarily accurate, and whenever we've treated it, the depression would lift. It's the only one of the hearing curves that can regress. So very often people would need a couple of sessions in order for it to correct completely. But understanding the mechanism of it and what effect it's having on the right hemisphere, I really don't know, but it's an interesting phenomenon. So what we do is a type of auditory therapy, which is rewiring both the ears and the brain. Okay, so this modulated music is pushed through and leaps between wideband modulation above and below 1,000 hertz in a randomized way, and it forces the muscles and the reflexes of the inner ear to have a physical workout. It literally gets them functioning better. Very often, for example, the stapedius reflex isn't functioning properly in someone with hypersensitive hearing. Very often these children may have had a history of glue ear or ear infections, often when speech and language is developing. So we're literally giving the ears a workout. But what we do in addition to that, we're able to tailor make what we deliver to that particular child's or adult's hearing curve. So if there's a 2/8 curve, we will put narrowband filters on the music to take out 2,000 and take out 8,000. And as we know, the brain rewires according to the stimulation you give it. So you take those out and the brain starts tuning into the other sounds more. We do the same thing with dyslaterality. So in the second half of treatment, we might encourage right ear dominance by reducing the volume to the left to get the brain to start paying more attention to sounds coming in the right ear. So it's a 10-day course. It's available remotely. You have to listen to this music twice a day, half an hour each time, with a minimum 3-hour separation in between. And we've worked over the last 3 years with the professor of audiology. His name's Professor Joshua Rees at Queen Mary University, London, who's been amazing. And we've taken what was analog technology developed by Doctors Barad and Tomatis, and we've really digitalized it and brought it into the 21st century, so we can now deliver this, to anyone. So it's been quite a breakthrough. It means that people aren't tied to having to come into the clinic twice a day to do it. So really what I wanted to say is, I mean, you are all working in the most exciting area I can imagine. I wish I could turn back the clock and be studying it all now, because right now it's such a super exciting time to study neuroscience. That the functioning of the brain and the body are inextricably linked. And I just, implore anyone involved in medicine, neuroscience, just to think about the whole rather than necessarily just looking at the individual parts as though they function in isolation. That a label doesn't have to dictate our inevitable fate. That there are many very effective things that can be done to turn around functioning, that it is possible to rewire the nervous system and the brain to improve that functioning, and also to rebalance neurotransmitter levels without necessarily relying on medications. And to always try and swim upstream from a problem to try and identify the root causes, rather than simply looking to suppress the symptoms through medications. So, a lot of the problems I've talked about, a lot of research focuses on the neocortex, because that's where we see that there is a problem in functioning, but it doesn't mean that's where the problem originates. So anyway, really exciting times, and that's all I have to say. So any questions, anybody?
It seems like there's quite a few questions in the chat, actually.
So let's have a look. So what kind of exercises would you provide to the children with to specifically help overcome the reflexes? So the exercises that we prescribe were developed originally at the Institute of Neurodevelopmental Psychology, where I also studied, and they've been, as I said, researched to death over the last 40 years. They're very slow, controlled, baby-like movements. So I think exercises probably isn't the right word, because it's not about leaping up and down. They're extraordinarily slow, controlled movements, and we know they do what they say on the tin. There is more than enough research to prove that they are very effective at getting rid of the reflexes, and when the reflexes have gone, we can see, and again it's been researched hugely to see the improvements in functioning and reading, writing, etc. Hi, I'm a tutor to a 9-year-old who seems to struggle with reading and writing despite the weekly sessions. Unfortunately, professional services to properly diagnose him are not available in the region. How can I help him better? Again, to me, more important than any diagnosis is to figure out what's going on. Why can't he read and write? And we can carry out our assessments remotely. So I would be able with that child to set up a remote assessment. The way that we work, the very first thing we do is called an initial screening consultation, and that's just for the parents. It's about an hour and it gives us the full developmental history. But the questions we ask have been researched to predict with a 90% accuracy where the problem's likely to be coming from. So that's our triage. Is it likely to be neurodevelopmental? Is it likely to be auditory? Is it likely to be biochem? Or is it likely to be something else entirely? So that would be where I would advise starting with that child, and you know, yeah, rather than endless tutoring, or rather the tutoring will become infinitely more effective if you also take away these barriers to learning that may be there. Hi, I want to ask whether the exercises done to overcome the reflexes are different in any way, considering how they're older when the reflex would naturally be integrated than the original stimuli. That yes, they are different, actually. It's a really good question. They seem to fall into three main categories, the exercises. There are those that directly stimulate. There are those that actively inhibit. So they're almost doing the absolute opposite movement. You saw the ATNR was like that, right? It was like the fencing. There is an inhibitory reflex we do where we're turning the head while flexing that arm and that knee at the same time. So we're literally doing the absolute opposite. So they can stimulate, they can inhibit. And then there are other ones that the INPP refer to as sort of constructed exercises that are somewhere in between. So yeah, they're not, but the Morrow exercise is almost like a slow motion Morrow movement that's happening. So some of them you can directly see that they are similar to what a baby would do at those age. These outcomes seem very positive. How far is microbiome testing from becoming a regular practice prior? Every single time we test the microbiome, first of all, or we look if there's any gut dysfunction. I'm saying every single time. The only thing that prohibits us doing it every time is the cost. So I think there's the, what is it called, the microbiome gut 360, which is the most accurate test. It's like 330 quid. It's quite expensive. There's another 2-day one you can do that I think is 200 or 220, and people just pay the labs directly for these. So we're only going to ask them to do that if we think there's very significant imbalance and or parasites. But with all of our biomed programs, we always beat the gut first. You know, we're following these functional medicine principles, and we will always put good stuff into the gut and try to make sure that it's functioning as well as it can. And, you know, if a child's on the spectrum, we're going to analyze that microbiome, because we know what a significant impact that's going to have on functioning. I mean, they actually, you know, they did these stool transplant experiments. I don't know if you've read about them, children on the autistic spectrum to mice, and the mice started showing autistic behaviors. The power of the microbiome, you know, really important. Let me see, please can you email me the talk? Yeah. Are there any similar studies on adults in terms of reflexes and rewiring the neuronal system? Most of the studies tend to be on children that I've seen, but we do treat adults. I would say it can take a little bit longer, especially if you're dealing with something like a Morrow reflex. By then it tends to be, they hang on to it. Their whole world is built on this, being used to having a TLR or a Morrow, and they can both create phobic behaviors. You know, it may take a little bit longer, but as long as they're willing to put in the time and the effort and do the work consistently, that's the key to neuroplasticity, consistency, then it has the same effect for them. Because we know the brain is plastic from cradle to grave. You know, we used to think it was just those first few years, but it isn't. It's always plastic. So this is amazing. I'm dyslexic too. I found it very useful and easy to understand. Thank you for that, Amana. And yeah, we've got to get you doing some exercises. That's great. And Andrea as well. I'm dyslexic, deaf in the left ear, hard of hearing in the other, with lateralization problems developed after stress, I presume, in my late 20s. So the lateralization problems happened after the stress. And I've noticed my depression more after this. And will the hearing therapy work for me? I'm 53 years old. So I'd need to know, I'd need to probably talk to you. You know, I can't say whether you even need that. It could be something else going on. By the way, some of these biochemical imbalances affect hearing. So pyrrole can create tinnitus and hypersensitive hearing. Some of the reflexes impact the way in which you hear. So they're all sort of interconnected. So I'd need to know what was going on and whether auditory is the factor causing the depression, because it might not be, it could be something else. So I would say, again, initial to come to us for the initial consultation, and that will help us pinpoint where the problem's coming from. From Janet, oh, Jan Thomas, are you on here, Jan Thomas? Is that Jan Thomas from Bishopsgate? Thanks, Sarah. I can certainly endorse everything you said. We had some amazing results in school, and the exercises really made a difference as we worked with them in school. The hearing therapy was also very successful. Always good to hear you speak. Jan is a miracle worker because there you are. Now I see you. Because she did so much hard work in that school. Back to the question we had before about children, can they be bothered to get on with it? Well, Jan was in there doing those exercises with kids every day, including with Chris Evans' son, Eli Evans, who went from, what was it, 2 years below his reading age to 4 years above it or something, just through doing the exercises. So yeah, lovely to have you with us.
Okay, can I ask a question? I think maybe you missed me saying, can I ask a question, please?
Yes, absolutely. Who's that? Is that Justy?
Yes, Sarah, it's absolutely amazing. What I found so amazing so far is that you and Professor Friston have had such different talks, and yet they're just so equally fascinating. One thing I was interested in what you were saying was about movement and stimulation, and how, for example, the kind of culture we're in now, that children don't get that. There's research that I've seen done with Mexican families, African families, and Western, I suppose that means American families. And it used to be found, not so much now, that one thing, the reason why Mexican families and African children seem to have developed in their movement and coordination a bit earlier, although all of them will catch up eventually, is because the parents did things like used to, when they were creaming their bodies, for example. I know Western parents do it now, but Caribbean and African parents and Mexican parents apparently do it more with their kind of more natural type of resources that they use. And I wondered if you felt that things like that, like just at the beginning of the baby's life, and when you're taking care of the baby, not just changing the nappy and using the nappy wipes, but actually just kind of like creaming the baby, stimulating the muscles a little bit like that. Do you think that could have something to do with some of the findings that you've got? Great talk. Thank you.
Yeah, a good question. I really think it does have an impact. And we're all getting less and less sensory stimulation. Have you seen those little fidget toys kids are using right now? Those little bubble things that are taking over the world. They're like little poppy things. Yes. And they're thinking, well, it's because now everything's sort of touch screen, isn't it? You haven't even got knobs and dials on things. I mean, all that stimulation that used to be there is sort of going. And I do think, yes, sort of the way that we evolved to do things. If you stick close to evolution, you're often not far wrong. We evolved to carry our children around and to put them down on the floor when we weren't carrying them around. And yes, to baby massages and providing them with as much stimulation. And the other thing is talking to them, which sounds so basic, but again, we often will clip them facing away from us. And I see these young mums on their phones like this, chatting away, and babies over there somewhere. And you sort of think, well, yeah, more stimulation is a good thing. So yeah, so I would agree with that.
Thank you very much.
You're so welcome. So welcome. So what have we got here? So I'm actually autistic too. Oh, yes, I'm going to definitely do a lot more research into what you've been talking about. It's so interesting. And I'm curious how you'd respond to some of the training. Yeah, exactly. And I think, again, with autism, place to start is gut. It's such an obvious place to start. And even looking particularly at the gluten, the dairy, the soy, those are things you can do for no money at all. It's tough to do it. It's not easy, but it can lead to such improvements in functioning. Where do I get my biomarker tested? Is it available on the NHS? Oh, again, I mean, God, it kills me that we can't do these things on the NHS, because they should just, cost a fraction of the price that they do. We send people to BioLab in London, or if they're in another country, it's actually easy. In the States, it's very easy. They have clinics up and down that we can send people to. But no, they're not typically done. I mean, some things you can do on the NHS. I mean, you can have your ferritin assessed, you can, assess for certain things, but we're looking at, blood plasma minerals typically, where we're looking at levels of obviously the zinc, copper and other things in the system. There's something called a methylation panel, which we can now do, which goes to a lab actually in the States, but it's really great because it will tell us exactly where in the methylation cycle things are breaking down. And that has a big impact on someone who's depressed, what it is you give them to correct that. Yeah, most of them aren't, but I'm trying to remember what the price is, but it's maybe 150 or 250 for all of the tests bunched in together. The only thing that's outside of that is, as I said, sort of stool analysis. If you do that, it does tend to be expensive, but it can be worth it. And again, if we treat women, for example, perimenopausal, menopausal women, we're going to want to look at their hormone levels over several days as well, because a lot of people, again, are put on antidepressants when maybe it's to do with hormone imbalance. Very interesting, thank you. Is there any double-blind controlled trials supporting this research? I couldn't find any on the Walsh Institute's website. Could I have the references, please? Yes. The best place is to contact the Walsh Institute directly for this. He has done some double-blind controlled placebo tests. Yes, he has. Do we have enough of them? No, we don't. And that's why really I'm putting it out there to the academic community at large. If anyone wants to do a study on any of this, that would be great. I'm essentially running a clinic rather than a research organization. I'm just interested in helping people get better, which is why often we're doing several therapies at the same time rather than one and looking at its results followed by the other. But all I can say is, we've grown purely through word of mouth. This stuff does work, and never give up hope for people that are struggling with things. Things can be made a lot easier in life. Okay, thank you, everyone.
Sarah, I just wanted to thank you for such a fascinating talk. I really enjoyed it. It was very clear and very engaging. Good. I think this was also just so valuable for me as a medical student, because often in medical school, there's an emphasis on how we can prescribe drugs to suppress symptoms. And as you stated, that if this is done inappropriately, it can actually have an adverse effect on patients. And your insight on providing a personalized approach in treating the patient and hopefully even treating their families, just small things and changing diet, exercises or reflexes, can actually be more effective and less invasive for children. So I think that's definitely something I will keep in mind. So once again, thank you so much for your time and your wonderful talk.
Oh, it's my pleasure. And thank you all for listening. I really appreciate it. Thanks, guys. Bye.
Thank you, Ms. Warley. Thank you so much. So it's 12:08. The next talk is scheduled for 12:15. So we have a few minutes break. Again, stretch your legs. Grab some water, grab a cup of tea or coffee, and then we'll be back at 12:15. See you then.